Let's get started with the square in the square block, which goes right into the center of our Friends Forever block. We're going to need that smaller white square that we cut earlier. I'm going to glue baste. This is optional. You can pin baste, but I'm going to show how I glue baste these together. And because I'm glue basting, I'm going to need my hot dry iron. So the first step is to mark or finger press the center of the long edge of each triangle. I'm going to use just two to start with. I'm going to apply them to opposite sides. It doesn't matter which opposite sides. In the directions I say top and bottom, but it really doesn't matter which you start with. But I'm just going to finger press. See, to finger press, I folded it in half, matched the corners along that long side, hold the corners in place, and then just pinch it right in the middle to make a little finger crease. You do not need to crease it all the way through the middle, just within that seam allowance area. So I'm going to do that for the second one as well. And again, this is with orange number 1, or which the color that you have deemed to be orange number 1. I'm going to align it at each side. Now I have to do the same thing with my square so that I can match those centers so that my triangles are placed correctly, and then it'll trim up and work out really, really nicely. So to glue baste, like I did in the previous videos, I'm going to draw a fine line of glue on the inside of the seam allowance here. Well, let me do it here on the red, or on the orange, so you can see it better. So just on the inside here, just a fine line. I'm using the microfine glue tips that I carry in my store, as well as washable Elmer school glue, which you can get at most stores. If you don't have it locally, you can get it on my website. Now, after I put that on, I'm going to flip it over. So for you, if you're not using these, it's going to be right sides together. So the glue is being applied to the right side. I'm aligning those folded marks and that cut edge and get it all nice and set, and then heat set that. Then I'm going to do the same to this side. That way both sides are prepared at the same time, and I can just sew that other side really quick and have it done without worrying about having to stop to do the other side or take out any pins. So the same thing over there. Align my folded marks and edges and tap it in place. Make sure that's aligned pretty well. That looks pretty good to me. What do you think? Yeah, I think that's great. And align that edge, heat set it, and now this is ready to sew. After I sew, I will press out to those sides and then do the same thing to apply both of these triangles. So we'll set those aside until we're ready. Next, we're going to prepare the snowball blocks for sewing. What I like to do, and what I'm kind of walking you through here, is how I like to prepare everything and just go sew everything that's prepared all at once. That way the sewing process is a little bit faster, and I can get through things a tad quicker for each block. So what I'm going to do to prepare the snowball blocks is start with your orange corners. You're going to need a pencil, some sort of marking tool, and a ruler. So with your ruler and a marking tool, you're going to draw one diagonal line through the middle onto the back side of each square. So what that will look like is this. Now, depending on the thickness of the pencil or pen that you're using, you may need to pull, and I'm going to exaggerate this just for the sake of the video, you may need to pull your ruler away from your diagonal line to make enough space for your pencil lead to draw exactly from corner to corner. So if you were just to align the ruler just right through the points and then draw a line on there, it may not be right in the center. If you can, this lead is pretty thin, but it is just off a tiny bit. So I'm going to pull my ruler away from those corners just a little bit, and this this little trick might help a lot with any time you're doing snowball corners. Just pulling your ruler away from it a little bit helps you to get that line marked a bit more accurately. So let's do the same for all 4. Just pull that away, mark it. What you can also do if you're really tricky is this. You can do 2 at a time on one ruler and get both aligned through the middles and mark 2 at a time, if you want to. Some, depending on how squirrely things, if they like to be shifty. And just hold that ruler in place and get both of those marked. So they're all ready to go. And we're going to use these for our snowball corners. So to prepare our snowball corners, we need our bigger white squares, and we're going to apply 1 of these to, it doesn't matter which corner, to a corner on all 4. These snowball blocks only have 1 snowballed corner. Some other blocks for different designs will have 2 snowball corners, sometimes even 4. But for this one, it's just a simple single snowball corner. I'm going to glue baste this as well. If you're going to pin baste it, you can use a nice thin pin, but I like to glue baste this. And what we are actually going to do is sew right on this line. When we get to the machine, I'll actually show you that I'm going to sew just a smidge to the inside of the line toward where the seam allowance would be, because that will allow me to have a more accurate block when this corner, I trim this off and this corner gets pressed this way. Sometimes you'll find if you've done these that your block ends up being a little too small. So if you sew more to the side of that line, when you press over, it will push the seam allowance out just a tad to where your corner will actually be more accurate. So to glue baste this, I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to draw a line of glue on the inside toward the seam allowance. So if you can take a peek, so I'm going to put this on here, and the glue is placed away from the center toward the seam allowance. Believe me, somebody, and I've done it before, will place the glue more toward this way, and then it'll be on the inside of the block. It happens. Glue is removable and washable, but if you can just remember that it needs to go toward the seam allowance, toward the corner we'll be cutting off, you'll be much happier, I promise. Okay, so then heat set that, and then I'm just going to cruise through all 4 of these so you can see how quick it is when I'm not talking and when you can just go. So again, toward the seam allowance, place it right in the corner, align those corners nice and even, heat set that. So the glue is going on the right side toward the seam allowance again, align those corners, and heat set. It goes pretty quick once you get the hang of it. All right, heat set. Now these are all ready to sew. So just to recap, so these are all ready to sew. So just to recap, I have my snowball corners ready to sew, and I have my first 2 seams for my square to square ready to sew. Next for preparation are our quarter square triangles. So what I'm going to do first, and what I highly recommend for you as well, is to lay out what one quarter square triangle will look like, so you can see how it's all going to come together. So orange, the darker of the oranges, which is orange number 2, is on what would be the bottom. They rotate around the block, so on some of them they're on a side or on the top. But just for placement, for getting these ready to sew, let's go ahead and have it on the bottom. And then the white is at the top, so the white and orange number 2 are opposite each other. And then orange number 5 and 6, 5 is the darker of these two. We're going to have this number 5 be on the right-hand side and number 6 on the left. Please refer to your layout and the pattern the layout in the pattern. Please refer to the layout in the pattern because I show and mark on there which numbers go where. And this is from the front. We are not reversing this. This is just as it is once it's sewn. For example, here's the actual block. And here is the sewn quarter square triangle. Orange number 2 at the bottom, white at the top, orange number 5 over on the right, and orange number 6 on the left. So just the same here, it's just not sewn. So the next thing we're going to do is glue baste these two together and these two together, or these two and these two. It really doesn't matter as long as you are consistent. So when you prepare the next set, that you glue the same ones together again. It's just easier to keep everything together. Unlike the Ohio Star, when we're sewing a white one with a red one, it's easy to do those because there's no way to really mix it up. But because we have 3 different colors here, we want to stay really consistent. So I'm going to draw a line of glue right on the inside of the seam allowance there, and then put that over. Draw a line here and pull this over. Now what I normally would do is stack all the colors together, all the same ones, and kind of do this assembly line style too. So that's what I'm going to do for the final 3. And then I'm going to, what I just did was I flipped it over, so the seam that I'm going to sew, they're right next to each other, ready to go under the machine. So see when I open it up, see that glued seam and the glued seam. So that way seams go together. If I were to have just done, done this, that seam is unglued, and then I would sew that and then it'd be messed up. So we'll keep the glued prepped edges together, and then we're going to get all the rest of the whites, the orange number 2, orange number 5, and number 6, all ready for preparation. So I'm going to pull these out of the way and just start glue basting them. So you'll see this in a little bit of a fast forward so that I can get these all ready for you. Now another option would be to set these all out like this and glue baste these all together. You'll find your own efficient system for taking care of these. Sometimes I rotate them like this. Again, there's no wrong way of preparation. Just be consistent so that all the edges that go together are together. Okay, and then make sure you heat set all of those. And then do your last batch. Again, I'm not rotating these around. I want to keep them oriented so I don't mix them up. Okay, and then I have this glued edge. This glued edge I have here, and I'm going to align it with those, and now they're all prepped and ready to sew. Everything is prepped. I have my quarter square triangle units prepped, the square and a square, and my snowball. So we are all set for some quick chain piecing. I'm going to set up my machine, and I'll see you in a second. I have all of my pre-prepared pieces here ready to go, and I have the thread that I'm going to use. Let's talk a little bit about this thread. I am going to use Swath Surfing for my piecing. This is included in the monthly thread set. The monthly thread set also includes various other types of thread, and the Surfing is my favorite to piece with. The set also includes a thread called 103. It looks like 1003 on the label. That's also a wonderful piecing thread. What I like more about the Surfine is that it's finer. It's more like a 60 weight thread, and it's a filament thread, so it's nice and smooth and fine. And because it's a filament, or the way the filament is made, it's from the silk that is spun, or that the silkworms spin themselves, where a spun thread like the 103 is made from the bits of threads left over that are then spun together like a yarn would be. So you can give both a try and see what you prefer. The one thing I like about the Surfine quite a lot is when I press my seams, the seams really go nice and flat. There's very little bulkiness in my seam from thread when I use the Surfine. So give it a try if you are getting the thread set. If you're not, any really nice cotton, 50 weight cotton will work wonderfully. My favorite 50 weight cotton is DMC, like the embroidery floss brand, and I do carry some in my online store. So we are going to go ahead and start chain piecing these guys. I'm going to start just going one at a time with what we've already pre-prepared, and I'll walk you through what I'm doing on each one. This piece here, this is our square in a square, and what I'm going to do is sew one side and then do the other side, and then both of them are ready. Now the reason I have chosen to piece with orange, and I have both of it in my bobbin and in the top, is all of the pieces I am sewing are predominantly orange. If I were to use white, I might not really like how white will pop up into the seams, but if you only have white or you prefer to piece in white because it matches the background, feel free. There's not a right or wrong here. It's really a preference. So I'm going to go ahead and sew on this seam at a scant 1/4 inch. That's my preference. Just remember, if you do use a full 1/4 inch, be consistent. Your blocks may end up finishing a little bit smaller than the size indicated, because sewing at an accurate 1/4 inch actually will draw in your pieces a little bit more, because pressing the fabric over kind of takes up space, so it doesn't make it the exact size. You might just find that it's smaller, but that's fine. If everything you're doing is like that and you're consistent, you'll just kind of keep that in mind, that that is how it's working for you. Just be consistent. So we're going to start with that first. So as I'm getting started, let me mention again the thread color I'm using that's included in your set. It is number 2395 of the Soie Surfine, and I'm going to sew with a scant 1/4 inch all the way down. No stopping or starting here. And I'm going to go ahead and... Now, what you can do that I sometimes will often do is just flip it around, and then I'll trim it later. So that way I don't have to cut a thread again. Okay, and now I'm ready for those snowball corners. I want to show you what I was talking about with where I'm going to sew. Now, again, this is going to get cut off right here, because this is that corner that will be cut off and just will be waste. And then this will get pressed over. In order for that to get pressed over and to be as accurate as possible, we can't really sew at a scant 1/4 inch because, well, we don't have a seam allowance over here. So I'm going to sew just on the right-hand side of my marked line, and that kind of makes it a scant 1/4 inch. And then when I press it over, that amount of fabric that has to go over won't draw in as much. I've left some space for it to move over. So I'll do the same for all four. And again, this is just sewing straight through. Regular old chain piecing here. I think if you have found that snowball corners that you've done in the past have been too small at the corner, I think this little trick might really help you a lot. Okay, now for those quarter square triangle units, make sure you're sewing on the glue side and not the unglued side. Point up just like we did in the past, and on these we are going to stop at that 1/4 inch mark, just like with the Ohio Star, so that this center seam can spin and nest and spin. Again, scant 1/4 inch. And even on these, sometimes I go just a thread smaller than scant. We're going to cruise through all of these. See, stopping and starting at that 1/4 inch really doesn't take that much more time. And it's so worth it when you get that beautiful nested and spun seam in the back. It really makes it worth that little bit of extra time. Now, if you're not sure where to stop at the 1/4 inch just by eyeballing it like I am, feel free to mark a dot. After a while, you'll get used to it and kind of gauge where it is. Oh, that one went one extra stitch, but that's okay. I'll fix that later. Alright, we're almost finished. And then we'll get back to pressing and getting these prepped for the final bit of sewing. And last one. All right. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and get these all clipped apart, and we will get them pressed and prepped for the next round. Now that each of these has gone through the first step of preparation for them, we're going to move on and prepare them individually. And these, the snowball corners, they are done being sewn. What we need to do with them next is trim and press. So we're going to go ahead and set these aside for just a minute and work on those after we get these prepped. These are for the 1/4 square triangle blocks. I'm going to set these aside, and we're going to work kind of in the same order that we've been working in. And of course, you can hop around. You can go out of order, at least out of order from what I'm doing at your preference. This is kind of just to keep me on track and make it easy for you to follow me. So I'm going to start with the square and a square. I always set my seam. See how this kind of curls up? Maybe in the video you can't see it as well, but these two edges kind of are curling up. This one does a little bit. I'm going to set the seam just to kind of boss it around and make sure it's laying flat like I want it to. And after I set the seam, and what setting the seam also does is prevent ripples. So right here I am piecing a straight grain to a bias grain, this cut side. So the ripples that sometimes happen in a seam can be prevented by setting the seam with your iron before you press the side. So we are going to press these to the dark side or out to the triangles. And do the same over here. Just set that and just press out. I'm pressing from the front, and then I kind of go to the back and just, again, boss it around. If you feel like these aren't laying very flat, you can get a little bit of starch and give it a little press. Don't starch it very much. Too much starch will make those ripples kind of show up, and we don't want that to happen. So again, here's a little side tip. If you do notice, if you that ripples show up after a starching, usually that means that you put a little too much starch on that initially. So just do a little bit of a lighter press, and you should be all fine, be set. Okay, so that is ready for the next step in preparation, which is adding on these two sides. So we do that the exact same way that we did these two. So I'm going to find the centers here, and what I'm going to do first is find the center based on this seam matching on both sides. Because right now, that's what matters most. If I were to do this and match the corners of my white, and say I accidentally sewed off a little bit and didn't get my seam allowances exactly the same, it might not actually be the center on one side or the other. So if you I do it from the front, if you align those seams so that they match on each end, and then, and then just pinch at that corner, do the same on the other side, pinch at that corner, then you'll have nice accurate center marks. So we'll do the same for these two triangles. Match that corner along the long edge and pinch so you get a matching center line. Same thing here. And matching center line. And we'll glue base those just like we did before. Glue base right along the edges here. Doesn't matter which is first as long as they both get done. Match my center marks and align those raw edges. Heat set that. Flip it around. That's just my preference. You don't have to flip it around. Line that center mark. That looks pretty good, huh? All right. And we're ready to go. So this is ready for its final two seams. And I will just sew straight through here, and then we will press out, and then this will be ready to trim two sides. Next up are our quarter square triangles. So first I'm going to set the seams of each. I just kind of lay them all out and just hit them with the iron. Give them a good whack. All right. And then make sure you press these all the same direction. So I'm going to flip these over. Actually, I'm going to go this way. And it doesn't matter dark side, light side for these, as long as they all go the same direction. So what I'm doing is just pressing this one this way, and on the other unit that will attach here, you want to make sure you press the same way also, just like with the Ohio Star. So when we flip it around, they match just the way that we want them to. So those two are ready. We'll just repeat that with all of these. I already said it. And now these are all ready to baste together and get ready to sew. I'll do that next. Now, if you feel like I'm hopping around too much, I sincerely apologize. What I'm trying to do here is just guide you through another method or technique for efficiency, and in that preparation of the first steps for each block. Because in that first block, the Limelight block, I walked you through individually, and you also did such an amazing job making that block. Felt that this step for some a way to use your workspace to do preparation and sewing would be helpful for you as you're working on other projects as well. If when you are doing this yourself, you need to fast forward or pause at any time, or skip and just do the square in a square sections first, feel free to fast forward me, pause me, whatever you need to do to have the most success with this block. And then you can go back and do the snowballs, and then go back and do the square in a square. I'm going to keep in the same order, square in a square, the quarter square triangles, and snowballs, so that you can predict what I'm going to be doing next for the times that you do want to fast forward through me. So that's what you can expect here. So I'm going to go ahead and baste all of these together. These are just like that Ohio star we did before, making sure that these match. We're going to nest that seam right at the middle. So we'll just nest that right in the center there. You can feel that those seams will lay flat along each other. And make sure those raw edges are all matched and not overlapping. And then heat set that in place. And you'll do the same thing for all four. Nest that seam, match those raw edges, and if you feel that the seam matches all the way from end to end, you'll be pretty in good shape for keeping your block nice and square. Okay, these are all ready to sew. So these are ready to sew now. What I'm going to go ahead and do is sew these two seams just like I did these two. And so all of these seams, these just like with the Ohio star from month 1, get sewn from end to end. There's no stopping or starting. So I'm going to sew these, and when you see these again, they will be sewn already. Let's go ahead and take care of our snowball blocks next. All right, to take care of these little guys, you'll need your rotary ruler and cutter. And we are going to trim off this outside corner. Please, 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 please do not trim this way, because then you'll have to make a brand new one. It happens. It really does. If it happens to you, try to be kind to yourself. Don't kick yourself too hard, or not at all. Just not at all. But it does happen. And if it does, it's just fabric and thread. You can cut a new piece and make a new one. But what we want to do, if you're a righty, we want to put this outside corner out to the right. If you're a lefty, you'll do it the opposite and put it out to the left. You're going to align your ruler at the 1/4 inch mark right on your seam. Okay, and then you're going to trim off this outside corner. Now, if you are a fan of tiny piecing, this makes an adorable little half square triangle. And what is fantastic about it is in most cases it's already a little bit glue basted for you. So you could just keep these little guys and have some tiny little half square triangles for a future project. So that one is ready. This is how it should look. We're going to go ahead and trim the last 3 just the same way. And then we'll press them to the side. And then they're ready to go. But I'll show you one little thing with them after pressing. A little tip to help you make sure that they are the size they are supposed to be. Okay. So we'll go ahead and press these. And they get pressed toward the corner. And if you feel that they aren't laying quite flat, give it a little starch, not much, just a little, and then that's ready to go. And now when you press these, you'll probably find that they don't make an exactly perfect 90-degree angle at the corner, and that is okay. the next thing I'm going to show you is trimming them, even if it's a smidge, so that they are more accurate size. That's one of the reasons I like to sew just to the right of that drawn line, because if anything, it makes this just a smidge big, and then I can trim it and it's the right size rather than it being too small and drawn in, and then it is small, and then I just would have to make sure to compensate for that in my seam allowance. And when I'm aligning the blocks, to use these 3 accurate corners here, these 3 here, for alignment, and not this guy if it's too short. We'll show you a little bit of that when we get to the block assembly. So let's take a look at trimming those real quick. Okay, so I have my ruler. You can use a square ruler, a rectangular ruler. It's really up to you. Just make sure that it is 4.5 inches or bigger, because we need to trim this square to 4.5 inches. So having a smaller ruler than that, that wouldn't work at all. Now we are going to align the corner, this corner here, because it's trued up. We cut that accurate, so we know this one didn't change. If anything, it's this corner right here that is a little short. So we want to, or a little big, we want to align that at the 4.5 inch and just make sure that it is the size we want it to be. And hopefully it's pretty accurate. And now if you can see here, I know it's a little hard, it is a little bit bigger right here. And while it doesn't seem like much to you, or from the camera angle, let's see, when I trim it, you can kind of see a little bit better. It might add a little bit to my piecing that I don't want it to add. So trimming even just a little bit is always helpful. So let's take a look at another one and see what we find. Okay. So again, this outside corner, align it at 4.5 inches. Now if you're doing snowball blocks that have 2 snowballs, one opposite each other, to trim it, I would use one of these accurate corners, not your snowball corners for trimming. Because you cut this accurately when you cut the square originally. So that's a good place to start anytime you need to trim snowball blocks. Because this is already trued, we aren't snowballing this, we'll just start here. Now this one is a lot bigger. I must have, either my square was big or I really went scant on that seam allowance. Now what you'll also notice, and I want to point out to you, is this seam here, because we did a 2.5 inch square, that 45-degree angle or that 45-degree seam should land right at about the 2.5 inch mark on both sides. Then it's pretty accurate. So cutting this off out here is going to make a huge difference in my piecing. If I left that in there, then my seams would not match up at all. That's a good 1/8 of an inch. Wow, that's a lot. So make sure you trim off those, especially when they're bigger. If they're smaller, you'll just compensate for it within the seam allowance. So let's check out this one. This one's not too shabby. A little bit. And the last one. A little bit there. Okay, it's always good to check them. Sometimes our eyes deceive us and we think that is perfectly square, and it really isn't. All right, so those are all set. And I will be back in just a bit with those other pieces all sewn up and ready to assemble.